Good evening, everybody. I'm going to give it a minute or so that everybody can tune in, because I know that not everybody is sat there ready and waiting for 8 o'clock. So tonight, hi Adri, I'm going to be showing everybody how to make a pleated jersey skirt. A super simple but amazing wardrobe staple for summer, but also obviously something that you can bring through. Hi Sarah, hello everybody. That you can bring through to winter and autumn as well. You could definitely wear this with tights, obviously depending on what colour you go for. But basically it's a skirt that is done in about 4 lines of sewing. So how amazing is that? So the first thing I'm going to do is talk you through measuring your body. Now people, if you've done dressmaking before, will be quite happy and confident with how to take measurements of yourself. Hence why I'm wearing gym wear. Don't get the wrong impression and think that I've been for a run or done anything remotely sporty today, because I definitely haven't. But what I will do is I will just show you, because obviously it's important to make sure you're taking correct measurements. Hi Leslie, you've made it! Rather than measuring over big bulky clothes. So I made my green skirt, which I've absolutely worn to death, took accurate measurements, and then the other night thought, oh, I'll just whip myself up a skirt, made this black skirt, measured myself over my really bulky dressing gown, and it's absolutely massive on me, so I need to gift this to somebody. So I'll be asking waist measurements later, because I've got a skirt to give away because it just falls down on me. So basically, and I don't want to horrify you all, but what you want to do is you want to be stood up. So if you're on your settee, then you need to get it up, and you want to make sure that you're not wearing anything that is too bulky, like I said with my dressing gown, and you want to stand in a fairly neutral position. Don't immediately, because you're measuring yourself, go because then you're going to make a skirt that you're not going to be comfortable in. But equally, don't kind of blow yourself out and think, well, there's room for lunch there. So the first measurement we're going to take, and all of this information that I'm talking about tonight, I've just popped on a little handout type of thing, a sheet with information on Facebook. So about 15 minutes before this went live. So if you can't take all this in, or you've not managed to tune in from the very beginning, then it doesn't matter. I'm measuring myself in centimetres. That's how we sell fabric. That's what makes more sense to me. But if you're an inches person, then obviously that is absolutely fine. So what you want to do is, the first measurement you want to do is where you want that skirt to sit. Everybody's very different. This is all very personal preference with dressmaking. I like mine quite high. My natural waist, my tummy button is quite high. So I like mine to sit there. And you want to make sure that, like I said, you're in that neutral stance, that you're not puffing out or breathing in, and take an accurate waist measurement for yourself. And then the second thing you want to do, and this is where you might need to rope in hubby or your daughter or somebody else that you're living with, it's pretty hard to do by yourself, is to take the tape measure from where you just measured, so wherever you want that skirt to sit, and you want to measure to where you want it to lie. Now I'll talk to you in terms of about what quantities of fabric you need, because if you've got a really long skirt, if you've got a maxi skirt or a midi skirt, then you might need to buy more fabric, have a little bit more fabric waist. But if you're quite happy with knee length or just below the knee, then you won't have much waist at all. You'll have quite an economical priced skirt. So I'm putting that tape measure where I want it to sit. Now, if I went to take a reading of that, of course, as soon as I bend down, then my tape measure bends with me, and then I'd get a measurement that would be super small, so 40 centimetres. Now if I wore a 40 centimetre skirt, then I don't think that would be in any way appropriate. Mine were about 70 centimetres, so that definitely wouldn't be right. So you need to get somebody to have a little look for you, and just make sure that you're getting a nice accurate reading. So they're the 2 measurements you want. Pop that beer belly away, wine belly. So our fabrics come on a roll, and they are 150 centimetres in length. So jerseys always tend to be extra wide. So like I said, my skirt measurement's about 70 centimetres. So what I can do is fold that fabric over in half, and the length here, as you can see, it's kind of midi. So I will be taking a little bit off the bottom of that once I've made the skirt. but it means that obviously I'm buying less fabric. Now if you want really quite a long skirt and it's longer than half the measurement of the fabric, then what you're going to need to do is buy double the amount. So there's a little equation on the handout. So basically, to create one front piece and one back piece, what we're going to do is take that waist measurement and we are going to times it by 1.5. So on the equation that I've popped on Facebook, it recommends that if your waist measurement was 120 centimetres, if you times it by 1.5, it's 180 centimetres. So to give yourself one front and one back piece, there would be 90 centimetres in width. Now obviously if you wanted a fairly short skirt, like the ones that I've made, well not, I say short, that's ridiculous. If you wanted a skirt that kind of sits around your knee, just below your knee, then you'd only need to buy 90 centimetres of fabric because you get the front and the back piece in the same piece of fabric. Now if you wanted a maxi skirt, that would mean you would need to buy 180 centimetres of fabric, but you're going to have quite a proportion of waist. So obviously you can always save that to do something else, like a scarf or headbands, or got, you know, a short skirt for somebody else, but you're going to need to buy more that way. But there is a little diagram. I've done some little drawings so that you can kind of get an idea of how I'm laying this fabric out when you're buying it. So in terms of the construction, once you've got past all of that, what's that a metre? It's £5 a metre is the fabric price wise. It's 150 wide and obviously there's 100 centimetres in a metre. So that's the measuring, and that probably for a lot of people is the worst bit. And the construction is actually pretty simple. So going back to some of the stitches that we were doing for the headband on Thursday, we're going to be using stretch stitches because of course this fabric stretches, and obviously when we're putting it on, putting it off, wearing it, we obviously need the fabric to move with us. So similar stitches, so if anybody tunes in on Monday, then you're ahead of the game because you will know all about stretch stitches. And again, I would always get you to test a little bit on some scrap fabric if you've got some. So the skirt that I'm making today is actually 80 centimetres of fabric, so I have got a little proportion of fabric that was scrap, so I've had to play with that. But my stitches are black because I'm using black fabric. How much fabric did you use to make your skirt? My first skirt I used 0.6 fabric, and this one I'm going to use 0.8 just because I wanted it to be a little bit fuller. And I'm going to be completely honest, my waist measurement has definitely got bigger in the last few weeks, and I'm putting that down to beer belly, wine belly. The pleats, if I show you Jane just asked about the direction of them. They actually go down the fabric. So quite often when you get a jersey fabric or even cotton fabric, the prints tend to go that way, whereas the pleats go this way. So it is slightly different in that respect in terms of when you're buying fabric, just to be aware of that. So the pleats go this way, so along the 150. But hopefully that little diagram will kind of explain all of that in terms of how much you need to buy. So where was I? Yeah, so I'm doing black fabric, and I'm obviously using black stitches, which never in a million years are you going to see. So I've got some of my lovely mustard fabric, and I'm just going to show you my stitches now. So I am, of course, going to be using my beloved zigzag stitch. And in terms of the width of the stitch, so how wide that zigzag is, you want it to be fairly narrow. So I'm going to put that on about 1. So those stretchy stitch guides will all remain on Facebook, so they'll be in our photograph section. So if you are, again, thinking, oh, she's rushing over this too quickly, or you've tuned in part way through, then there's a whole sheet there on stretchy settings. Now I know there's some fantastic people who have amazing sewing folders with everything in, so it's always something you could print off and pop in there, and they've always you've got to refer back to. Obviously sometimes trolling through Facebook or through your phone's a nightmare when trying to find things. So we want a fairly narrow zigzag, because although it's a zigzag, we want it to stretch, we don't want it to be really broad. and the length of the stitches, so how far apart they are, we want them to be fairly close. So a bit like when you're sewing your straight stitch, about 2. So anywhere between 2 and 2.5 is a regular stitch length. Anything longer, so further apart, tends to be a bit loose, and anything close together is just super tight. So God forbid you had to do any unpicking, you just wouldn't be able to. So the seam allowance I'm going to use is 1 centimetre, so I'm just going to replicate that. And I'm going to start my 3 securing stitches forwards and then backwards. See what they're looking at. Oh, I've got my settings the wrong way around. So that is stitch width 2 and length 1. So there is movement in there. They would probably actually be fine. So what you're looking for, I've forgotten to talk about needle. I will talk about that now. Is that the stitches are stretching with the fabric. And if they were feeling like they were taut or they were going to snap, obviously within limitations, then I would need to think about altering those settings. The other thing I'm going to do is just have a little peep at the stitches. So pull it onto the right side and just see if there's anything that looks like it's too gappy or the tension's not right. And again, I'm quite happy with those. So what I might do is just have a little play around, because generally my go-to settings are 1 for width, 2 for length, and just see if I'm happy with those settings. It's because the settings on my Brother machine are opposite to my beloved little Genomes in the studio, so that is where I've switched the settings. I'm going to feel it. Still feels like there's nice stretch, we're not missing any stitches, and again, if I just peel that seam back, again, that looks all right. So anything within that ballpoint figure, ballpark should I say. So I'm quite happy with my stitches. So on Thursday, when we're talking about sewing with stretchy fabrics, I showed you my lovely geeky like needle safe. So my lovely friend Nicola bought me this, and honestly it has to be one of the best things I've bought. So all my needles are in here, so I know that there's a really high man-made content in this fabric, and it is quite stretchy. So I'm going to use a stretch needle. Now, when I was making my infinity scarf on Thursday, it had quite high natural content, so it was 95% cotton, and generally you'd use a ballpoint needle for those. So there's no necessarily hard and fast rule for which needle works. I know, Sarah, I love this. But wait, it's just a case of experimentation. So, but the general rules are, if you were sewing something super stretchy, like if you're doing swimwear or underwear, or like I said, there's a lot of man-made content in your fabric. Like the very stretchy fabric I made my headbands in, stretch needle is brilliant. You would know if your needle wasn't happy. Say for instance you just kept your regular needle and thought, I'll chance it. It could work and it could be absolutely fine, so stick with it. But if it isn't happy, then what would happen is that you would have a few zigzags and then maybe like a couple of straight stitches, it'd miss a stitch, a few zigzags and miss a stitch. So you'll know if your needle's not happy because of that. If the needle's happy, then it should never miss stitches. So I've swapped, I pre-did that to my stretch needle. I'm quite happy with my stitches. Now I've tested a couple of different ways. The first thing we're going to do is the side seams of the skirt. So I'll just grab my green fabric back. So I've got my fabric and I've done my measurements. So this is 80 centimetres wide, which is what I want the skirt to be. And I'm quite happy with the length being about 75 centimetres. So the first thing to do is to cut your fabric in half, where I'm holding it here. So when they come on the roll, possibly when they come in your parcel, they will be folded here. And the first thing to do is to cut it there. So I've got the correct width. and I'm just cutting along that fold line. Now, I always say this, you can always cut more fabric off, but you can't stick it back on quite the same. So if you're unsure about the length, what I would just do is cut it directly in half, make the whole skirt, and then try it on. Obviously, it depends on what top you're wearing with, what shoes you're wearing with it, all that kind of thing. Oh, it's saying poor network connection. Can everybody hear me all right? Hopefully. So you can always cut more off. If you hack a load off now and make it really short, and then try it on and realise it looks ridiculous, then, you know, it's game over initially. So cut along that fold, and it gives you a front and a back. And the first things we're going to do are the side seams. Yes, I'm back. Oh no. Flipping technology letting me down. So with my black skirts, what I have done is I've just done one of my side seams. Now these stitches are literally like impossible to see. So if you can find a right or a wrong side, then you're going to put right sides together. I haven't found a right or a wrong side, and I'm on to skirt number 3. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but there may well be a right or a wrong side. So I'm going to sew the side seam, and I'm going to use a 1 centimetre seam allowance. If you've got an overlocker and you're loving using it, then absolutely use your overlocker. It doesn't have to be your stretch stitches, but you can do the whole thing on a sewing machine, so you don't have to have any special machines or equipment. So I'm going to do a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now I appreciate you just can't see black stitches on black fabric, so you'll have to believe me that they're there. Got any questions, just keep them popping up, keep glancing, and just keep my eye on it so that I can answer any as we go along. But hopefully, obviously, anything you might have missed previously should be on that little handout I've popped on my previous Facebook post. Yeah, it doesn't mind pins, to be honest. I'm just doing this for speed and laziness. They're not putting pins in. But yeah, it doesn't tend to pucker, it's not too delicate. I'm a big fan though of glass head pins, which are really fine, just because I've used them so much with the sheer fabrics, the fine fabrics, the crepes, that I'm converted. So yeah, it doesn't mind pins, so don't worry too much about that. I'm going to use some pins in the next thing that we do. Okay, so basically created a big tube like this. So got my side seams done like that, but of course obviously I've made it 1.5 times my waist, so it's not going to sit where I want it to until I put my elastic in. So 1 inch wide elastic, I've gone for black because I've got black fabric or dark fabric, but you can get this in, you can get this in loads of different colours, but you can mainly black and white. So if you've got a lighter fabric, you might want to go for lighter elastic, and obviously dark for darker, but it isn't seen, it's enclosed on the inside. So if all you have is white elastic but you're doing a black skirt, don't worry about it. So again, back to the measuring stage. Now, like I said the other day, I made a skirt that was miles too big because I just took an elastic measurement when I was wearing a really thick, bulky dressing gown. So what you want to do is take your waist measurement. So I've got my elastic waist measurement would be there, and that is the measurement of my waist, but it's not particularly engaging the elastic. Now, when we sew it, we're going to be exercising the elastic, so you want to make sure that any stretch in there is kind of removed. Now, what would happen with this is obviously as it's being worked on the machine is it would get a bit slacker and then it wouldn't sit where I wanted it to. It would kind of sit further down and be a bit bigger. So what you want to do, I mean, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, is exercise your elastic. So just to engage all the fibres of the elastic is to stretch it, because that's what we're going to be doing when we sew it. And it sounds, I always say this when we're doing like pyjama work and stuff, it sounds absolutely ludicrous, but you want to try and get as much elasticity out of it as possible. Warm it all up. God, I do look like I'm doing some sort of weird workout, don't I, tonight? So I've engaged the elastic a little bit and I'm going to re-measure my waist. So I tend to make my elastic about 2 inches smaller than my actual waist. I like things quite tight. I like to feel like they're holding me in a little bit. Everybody is different. Some people absolutely can't stand things pressing on the tummy. I know people who've got like IBS or whatever who are prone to bloating would hate that, but I like things quite tight. So I'm going to engage that elastic, so I'm stretching it now. I'm just leaving myself with enough so that I've got about 1 inch overlap like that. And I'm going to cut my elastic. So I think my waist was something like 78, but I cut it down to about 73. So I'll take a couple of inches off and then I've got about 1 inch overlap. So actually I'm taking about 3 inches off there. So I'm making it quite small. But like I said, so different elastics will stretch differently. Different people like different things. So the next thing I want to do is make this into a loop. And then eventually we'll attach the 2 loops together. Now quite often with a seam we put right sides together like that and then sew a seam. But then you're going to get quite a bulky lump of elastic and we want it to sit nice and flat. So what you're going to do is take the elastic and lay it on top of another. So what effectively would be like right side to wrong side. So it's a flat loop. And what you want to make sure you've got no twists in your elastic. That would be a nightmare. So you can do a couple of things now. You can either do a flat box seam, which is just with your narrow zigzag stitches, kind of round in a little box with cross hatch. Again, so it's got something that's got stretch, it's nice and sturdy. I'm just going to do some broad zigzags. So the zigzag settings I had on before, the width of the zigzag was 1, so it's really quite narrow, and now I'm going to make it nice and wide. So I did this when I was doing my apron the other day and I was attaching my bias binding onto it, and my machine width goes to 7, so I'm going to make it as big as possible. I'm just going to sew those 2 layers together. Go crazy. As long as it's nice and tight, do not worry what that looks like, and nobody will ever see it, only you will know what it looks like. So don't be too precious with those stitches. I'll try and show you, but I don't think I've got a cat in hell's chance. Oh, maybe, can you see them? So just nice broad zigzag like that. So my zigzags, how close together they are, I've left them on the same settings, which was 2, so 2 apart. But you might have seen on the video there, I've just come forward and back and forwards. I've just gone a bit crazy really, just to make sure it's tight, so it's not going to ping open and obviously the skirt's going to land on the floor. So I've got a piece of elastic, which is slightly smaller than my waist, and I've got a piece of fabric that is 1.5 times my waist. So they're completely different sizes at the moment. So to join them together, to make it as easy as possible, what I'm going to do is divide this into quarters. If you've got any little bits of elastic like that, you can just take those off if you feel like they're going to be bulky. So I'm going to use the seam that I've just done and use that as one of my quarter points. At the opposite point, I'm going to pop a pin. So that's like a halfway point. So say for instance, obviously the sides of the skirt, I could join that with the side seam and that with the side seam, and now I'm going to do 2 more in the middle. So I'm going to bring my pin to my seam like that, and again stretch out, and I'm going to pop another pin in here. Trying to just keep my eye on questions. If you have got any, please please do feel free. I'm trying. But you can always ask them again. Don't think I would think you were rude if you repeated them. I just might not have caught them the first time. So now I've got like 4 divisions. I'm just going to pop a pin in this one just because I'm aware that it's black. Yes, Janet, we sell scissors. We do sell these ones. I did a pre-order on those the other week, and I'll do another one because they were really super popular. And we sell just some basic ones as well, which are absolutely fine as well. But I'm just a bit obsessed with these rose gold scissors at the moment. So I've got 4 pins in this. I'm going to go to my skirt and I'm going to use the top edge. So the top edge is the one that I cut. And I'm going to pop a pin at my side seams because they literally do disappear into the black fabric. Obviously, because all your pleats run down, it's hard to actually see where your side seams are, which is quite nice actually. And then another one at this side. And then a bit like I did with the elastic, I'm going to bring the 2 pins together and then stretch out the fabric and then pop a pin in here. Like that. And then another one at this point. So I'm definitely most nervous. I get really nervous before these. I don't know why. I never used to when I was teaching or when I was doing workshops. So I get all nervous that something's going to go wrong, like technology or God knows what. And I always get a bit nervous with this stage. So I've got my skirt and I've divided it into 4 quarters. I've got the elastic and I've divided them into 4 quarters, and now we're going to put them together. And it definitely is the trickiest part of this. You feel like you need to make an octopus and you need about 4 hands. Obviously that just isn't happening, so we've only got 2. So we're going to be putting our elastic on the inside of the skirt. So you want to almost like slip the band inside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to match up my quarter points. So taking the pins together, and I'm just going to take my pin out and then pop it back in. So now it catches the elastic and it catches the fabric as well. So when I'm pinning them together, I'm trying to pin the top edge of my skirt and the top edge of the elastic together. And again, like I was doing with the lost my train of thought then. Oh God, can't have been that important. Right, another pin together, like that, and then another pin like that. So just make sure there's no twists in the elastic, because obviously there's quite a bit of fabric here. It definitely goes through a stage where it looks a little bit crazy. I'm pinning my elastic onto the wrong side, so onto the inside of the skirt at the moment. We don't do a great deal from the outside, to be honest. We tend to be looking at the inside of the skirt. Like that. So this bit, like I said, is definitely the hardest bit to gauge. I'm starting to wonder if I've made my elastic just a little bit too small for this skirt to even humanly possibly fit into. We'll see. Anyway, if it's a disaster, it doesn't matter. So, right, I've got my broad zigzags and I'm going to stick to those settings. So whatever your machine goes to, set it as wide as it will possibly go. And what you're going to do is where your needle, see if I can get you right in there. Let's have a look. See if we can get this camera a little bit closer. So, where your needle goes into your machine at the right hand side, you want to pop your elastic and your skirt fabric so that it's lining up there like that. So what we're aiming for is a little bit like what an overlocker does. When the needle bounces to the left, it's in your skirt and your elastic, but then when it bounces to the right, it's actually in fresh air, so it's sort of binding that edge at the same time. Although jersey fabric doesn't frizz, it's not the end of the world. Now this bit, I would definitely recommend having a little practice first with some scrap elastic and some scrap fabric, because what you want to do is you want to hold the elastic taut and stretch the elastic. So you're stretching the elastic out so that the elastic is stretched the width of the fabric, but you want to move the elastic at the same time, so it's really quite tricky. So I would definitely have a practice. So on gut reaction, it is to pull the elastic, but obviously if you pull the elastic towards yourself, then it's not going to move through the machine. So you've got to have your hand at the back of the machine as well as at the front of the machine, so you're keeping that elastic nice and taut. I think I've probably got too much fabric in here. I'm starting to wonder if I measured it or I just did it at me. No, I don't think I did. I did measure it. Ooh. So I'm going to hold my fabric, my elastic, so it's nice and tense. So your shoulders will probably feel like they're really aching at the end of this day. Yeah, it definitely feels like a two-person job. So I'm stretching my elastic and I'm going to start sewing. I'm just going to do little bits at a time, and you want to keep, because obviously your fabric will want to move and your elastic may want to move as well. And I'm just kind of readjusting myself and making sure that those top edges are still in line with each other. And then just stopping every so often, but not forgetting to keep that elastic nice and stretched. You can kind of go, oh, yeah, you could divide and pin into eighths. That's a great idea. I know one top tip is, and I've written that on a little handout, is to hand tack as well, just so that your pins don't ping out as you're obviously stretching the elastic and they don't go pyong. A walking foot, I'm not 100% sure about a walking foot, mainly because I've never really used one. But there shouldn't be too much bulk in terms of what's going on with the fabric, but it might well help. So again, I'm just going to readjust. I'm going to grab my elastic for this section and again stretch it right out. Make sure I'm holding on to my quarters really nice and snug. Do a little bit, readjust, because obviously the jersey does want to move a little bit. This is definitely difficult to try and narrate this and sew at the same time. I feel like I need some cheesy background music on. Like on hold. Remember, if you're not massively keen on how these stitches are looking, if you think they're a bit wonky or they're not particularly regular, remember that absolutely nobody sees them. These are all hidden on the inside of your skirts, in your waistband, or what looks like a waistband. I've definitely popped too much fabric into my elastic. I think I've either made my skirt a bit too big, a bit too gathered, or I've measured my waist a little bit too small. So it might not be the neatest, but then happens when you multitask, and what I tend to find out with my children is that's not always the best recipe for things. Quarters to do, so literally just focusing on each quarter at a time definitely breaks it down, but like Sam said, if you did it in eighths, again, that would be brilliant. Just rather than, shouldn't snap the needle, there shouldn't be too much bulk there, it's more a case of just keeping the resistance on the elastic, just keeping it stretched. So now my hands are like getting really tired because obviously, and it's your shoulders that tend to ache because obviously you're keeping that tension in your arms. Noticed that on the Facebook events page I've popped on a elasticated skirt version for children. So that is, the idea of that is that it's a cotton skirt, so it's completely different in terms of its construction, obviously because of the nature of the fact that cotton is so different. So I'm nearly back to the beginning now. Okay, so I don't think I made that particularly easy. So, lost track of time, don't worry Bernie. So, what you've got now is your fabric attached to your skirt. Just trying to show you a remotely good angle, which I don't think I've got one. And then what you want to do is you want to take that waistband and you want to fold it on the inside of your skirt. So what you want to do is you want to pull the fabric over so it's nice and snug at the top, so it's nice and tight, you've not got loads of baggy excess fabric over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing my two side seams. If I can find them, the black fabric, and pull that down first. So again, almost like do it in quarters. So again, I'm just focusing on a quarter at a time. So I've got one side seam there. This thing with black fabric, that all the seams just blend in. Where's my other side seam? Oh, well, I'll just do it here, like that. Again, just pulling it over about halfway from my other pin. And again, it's just so I've got a few pins kind of around the top edge of the skirt, just holding it down into place like this, just to make it a little bit easier when you come to sew it all together. Like this. Okay, so you've kind of got your elastic and it's tucked over. I've got those pins into place just so it gives me, again, little divisions. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop back to my quite narrow zigzag settings. So once you've done that step of attaching the smaller waistband to the bigger amount of fabric, which is definitely the fiddliest bit because you're having to stretch your elastic out to meet the width of the fabric, this bit is just kind of holding it down into place. So it kind of gives you the appearance you've got a waistband, which obviously we haven't, we've just got the elastic in there. So my stitches are now going back to my original ones, which were about 1 wide 2 in length. So where I'm going to be sewing now is I want to sew fairly close to the bottom of my elastic so that it's going to hold all of that down in place. So what I always like to do and I find quite useful is to line up the edge of my presser foot with the edge of the elastic. Now everyone's machine is different, it depends where your needle position drops in. So you want to make sure it's maybe about 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 inch away from there. So again, I'm just going to do it in these little divisions that I've created. I think I've probably put about 8 in this time. And again, I'm stretching my elastic to meet the fabric. So it's that tension in your arm. So I'm pulling from the back and from the front, so to keep it all tense. I'm not just pulling at the front. And that is the key thing that people get wrong, is pull at the front and then it doesn't want to move anywhere. Whenever you feel you need to, just stop and readjusting. So I'm going to do it kind of at each one of those divisions. And again, just stretching that fabric out, making sure it's nice and taut, so it's pulled down. Keeping on readjusting and rolling it round, but what you don't want to happen is too much fabric to kind of bag up here. You want it to be nice and taut, like I said, to create that idea of it being a waistband. And again, stop and readjust. Has anybody got any more questions or maybe kind of suggestions or alternatives or anything else? Anyone find this mind-boggling? So the really lovely thing about this fabric is that it doesn't fray. So it does actually behave itself quite nicely actually. Like some of the fabric we're talking about on Thursday curls like crazy, so it can be a bit frustrating to work with jersey. But this one's quite nice. And the other thing is you don't need to do a hem, which I think is always a winner. So again, just keep on that stretch, keeping it nice and taut. Readjusting wherever I feel it needs to, if the fabric starts moving again. I'm going to pop another couple of pins here because I'm going to call it a problem area. I think this is an area in my measuring. I definitely know I've messed up because I've just realised that it was a metre and not 80 centimetres, which was a bit silly. At the end, it's so hard to tell with black fabric. So that is not looking too bad at all. So that could have been an absolute catalogue of disasters. Yeah, so I cut my fabric yesterday as I was rushing out of the studio because there isn't much of this fabric left, and I think I've cut myself a bit of a bigger piece than I needed to. Anyway, actually, surprisingly, it looks absolutely fine. So you can see it kind of gives you that idea of it being a waistband. So apart from cutting your threads off, and then obviously I need to think about adjusting that length. Not that this skirt's going to particularly go with my sportswear. So I'm dropping my lovely scissors now. So you've got the idea of that waistband there. I know it's a case of just adjusting the length, which I'm probably not going to do now. So I thought that was going to be a total disaster, but I think that's okay. So, apart from the fact it doesn't go with this lovely top or with these trainers, that is basically the skirt done. Now, I'm probably fairly happy with that length. I'm going to take a little bit off because I've got the selve edges off. I've not even cut those off yet. So what I will need to do, so it doesn't matter how much you take off, whether it's an inch or 5 inches, what you're going to need to do is just re-secure the side seams. So where you cut through those stitches, of course, after time and wear and tear, they're going to start to come undone. So you need to make sure you secure those stitches. So I'm hoping that I didn't make that look too scary and ridiculous. I was hoping this doesn't look like a bin bag either. I think it looks nicer in real life in the black. So all the information about measuring yourself, about working out how much fabric you'll need and how to buy it in terms of length of skirt and width of fabric, and then all the construction techniques. So if you were a bit baffled with the stitches that I've used in terms of the stretchy stitches, there's another information sheet on from Thursday on there. So if you go on the photo section of the no, so you don't need to hem it, Sarah. It's amazing. Like, I'm the worst person ever in the whole wide world for hemming things. I just don't do it. So you don't actually need to hem it. So it's like my dream fabric. So basically 2 side seams. Obviously that attaching the waistband, which I can't deny that it is scary and faffy and you feel like you need about 4 hands, but break it down into little sections to make it easier. Hand tack your little sections so your pins don't ping out. Just take it nice and slowly. Obviously, if you've not got people watching you and a little time limit and stuff, then it doesn't matter. You can kind of do a little bit and then walk away from it. But that's the main thing that I think is probably a little bit scary. But have a little practice with some scrap elastic. Now, if you bought a metre or a couple of metres, you tend to always get these odd shaped pieces left. So just take a bit of your scrap fabric and a bit of your scrap elastic and just have a mess around with getting that idea of stretching the elastic as you move it through your fabric. I always imagine if you stood up that it'd be like a bit like doing a lunge, because you're kind of keeping steady but moving at the same time, which doesn't make any sense at all. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm going to be in the studio tonight because I've got all the orders to post tomorrow that need pretty packaging. So just send me a message, ask me a question, and I'll be around to pick them up. So let's see if there's any more. Oh, thank you. Any more questions, just getting in there. But yeah, that's it. Apart from to cut your bottom of your skirt off and obviously just tidy up any securing stitches, that's your skirt totally done. Thank you everybody for watching. Thread catch pincushion, probably not, but I can send you a link to that, Sam.